Okay, we're ready to continue our program. And here to talk about how addiction can happen to anyone, I have here with me retired CRNA Mary Kay Bader.
All right, guys. Good morning. My name is Mary Kay Bader, nurse anesthetist, retired since 2020. I usually give this talk to various anesthesia schools, which I've been doing since 2018. So I'm kind of gearing it up a little bit differently, but I will tell you my story of addiction. Addiction doesn't only happen to the gutter bum that you see with his bottle of vodka. It can happen to anyone. I went to, I've always been an overachiever, went to school in St. Genevieve, salutatorian, class of 1979, then went down to SEMO and got my BSN, and was working as a nurse for a little bit, decided that I needed something more than just nursing. Mostly I was working in a small hospital, Perry County, and I had been married, and we had one child in 1983, and then I was thinking about going to nurse anesthesia school at that point, but we had another baby, and so that baby was born with spina bifida, so that put off my wishes to go to nurse anesthesia school. Currently, I am the mother of 5 beautiful children and an angel. My children are all very successful. They're my pride and joy. But I do suffer from substance use disorder. I am an addict. I'm the classic example of it can happen to anyone. And the reason I'm speaking today is to recognize that drug addiction, unfortunately, is thriving in our profession of nurse anesthesia. Fortunately, I'm alive and able to speak to this issue. Many anesthesia providers have been afflicted with addiction or found deceased, and no one even had the faintest idea that they suffered from this dreaded disease. I will tell you that my opinion on the concept of substance use disorder has certainly changed over the past several years. When I was in training, substance use disorder was barely mentioned in anesthesia training. However, in the field of anesthesia, because we have such unlimited access to very high, powerful drugs, it has become the number one risk factor when you enter the profession of nurse anesthesia. And I actually had an experience with a gal who had suffered from substance use disorder, and this was back in like 1988, 89. She joined our class because she had to sit out for a while and retake some classes in order to get back into anesthesia. And my righteous self is thinking, how can anyone be so silly, so stupid, as to throw away everything they'd worked so hard for because of drugs? Shouldn't they be able to just put it down and walk away from it? Karma came back and visited me many, many years later. I am living proof it's not that simple to walk away from addiction once it's sunk its ugly claws into your brain. And I'm one of the fortunate CRNAs because I'm still alive. So I will share my painful story of addiction and recovery. And the purpose of my sharing my story is to help spare others from the death grip of addiction. It's been swept under the rug by our profession for far too long. Although in the past, I will say 10 years, we are becoming more vocal about it with our national organization, the AANA, because this disease does wreak havoc wherever it goes. The devastating effects of this disease are left on the family, friends, coworkers of anyone who suffers from addiction. And believe me, once again, if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. So I gave you a little bit of my history. Quite the overachiever, perfectionist, and believe me, you want your anesthesia provider to be a perfectionist. So I went to anesthesia school, and that was from 1987 through 1989, up at Washington University in St. Louis, Barnes Hospital. And I was determined I was going to be the best anesthesia provider ever. I did my best throughout those 2 years that I was up there. I graduated with both the highest honor awards in both didactic and in practicum. Very good ego going there. So I graduated in September of '89, went to work in Perryville, Missouri, which was the hospital I'd worked before as a nurse. So it was a solo position, which meant that I was on call 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, except for the basically 6 weeks of vacation that I arranged to have. It was a ton of call. I would never recommend it again for anyone. And I know people say, well, you weren't as busy back then. No, we maybe weren't, but still, a lot of responsibility and being tied to a hospital. So then in 1995, I had a partner join me down at that hospital. So I was in heaven because I was only on call half of my life. So being on call so much, I didn't do self-care very well. I let some of the things that I used to enjoy go by the wayside because I just didn't have time for them. So the story of addiction begins on an evening in November 2009. And at this point, so in 2005, I moved up to St. John County Memorial Hospital, where there were two of us also, two anesthesia providers. And I placed a labor epidural that evening. And being in a rural hospital, our policy was that as long as an epidural was running, you stayed in-house. So I went back to the office and was messing around on the computer, and I happened to reach down into my jacket pocket, and I found a 2 cc vial of fentanyl. And I was kind of crabby that night. I'd gotten called back in again, and had a headache, and then curiosity kicked in, and it's like, I wonder what this would do if I would inject that 50 mics or 100 mics of fentanyl. And I paused. So I had the little devil on one side saying, do it, and the other one saying, don't you dare. For 20 or 21 years prior to that, what I would have done was go back through the records, see who I had charged for that, and return that vial to the pharmacy. I chose, that was my one time I had a choice. I chose to not do that. Instead, I waited till the woman had delivered, which I think, as my memory was, it was sometime before midnight. And I went in the office, and at first I injected 50 mics, and I felt the whoa feeling. And then I waited maybe, 15 or 20 minutes, and I injected the other 50 mics of fentanyl. Like I said, I should have never listened to the little devil voice that was saying, how would this feel? I regret that very much. And I went on home. So, not realizing that this was the beginning of a really bad thing. My addiction went on for almost a year with increasing usage, and not just fentanyl, whatever I had left over. It may have been Sufenta, it might have been morphine. And usually I would use when I got home. It just became ugly. So my daughter graduated from high school in 2010, and we went on a big family vacation down to Disneyland, or Disney World, whichever one's down in Florida. So I thought to myself, well, certainly, I'm going to be away for basically 2 weeks. I'm going to be away from there. This is going to be a good thing. And certainly when I come back, I'll have kicked this. My husband had caught me because my paraphernalia was at home that I used to inject. And I very quickly put him in his place, that I had it under control, I was going to stop, don't worry about me, I got it, you just go do your thing. So we went on vacation, and it was a great vacation. Get back to work, so this is probably in July of 2010, and I maybe lasted a week. I looked at myself in the mirror every morning, and I begged God, please don't let me do this anymore. But I didn't know where to turn, and because of the stigma, I was too scared to reach out, knowing that I was probably going to lose my job because of this. So I kept my dreadful secret for several more months. Then I remember it was the end of October, and I think I got called in like 4 times that weekend. So guess what? I was using that weekend. When I returned, it happened to be like November 1st of 2010. The pharmacist called me up and said, hey, I'd like to speak with you. And I knew what he was going to say. So he met me around 3 o'clock. I confided in my comrades, other nurses that worked at the hospital, and told them that I'd been using basically for a year, and that I needed help. And the pharmacist said, I'll let you get help, but you got to go and you got to do it now. So tried to contact the EAP. As it went, I went on home and drove myself home. And then by the time the EAP got things arranged, it was a good 24 hours later. I remember being told, you need to get up to Wentzville for a detox program. So I guess I was kind of lucky in a way that I really didn't go through withdrawal symptoms. If I did it while I was at home in that 24 hours. Drove on up to Wentzville, did a 3-day stay there. From there, I was told to report to Edgewood. It was off of Olive in St. Louis for an outpatient treatment program for 2 weeks and stuff. So I did as I was told. So basically, I'm using heavy-duty IV drugs, and I'm told that an outpatient therapy program for 2 weeks is going to fix me. Believe me, it didn't work. I knew at that time, when I checked out of there, that that was not going to work. So I confided in the medical staff at St. John Hospital. They had connections where I went to a place called Resurrection Treatment Center up in Chicago. So I was up there for 2 to 3 months. And mind you, this just happened to be over Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I cried and I cried and I cried. So got up there to Resurrection. I confided in another nurse anesthetist who I knew had had similar problems. And he said, Mary Kay, you get yourself up there, you do this. If you miss this Thanksgiving and this Christmas, it's so that you will have so many more in the future. So I put that in the back of my mind. Learned the tools of the trade somewhat. Began going to therapy, doing drug screens, going to AA meetings. And believe me, that first AA meeting, it's like, how did I get here? I don't want to be here. And everybody knew it. You know, it's like when you first walk in, hi, Bob. How are you, Bob? You know, it's like no one wants to go to their first AA meeting. I can't imagine that they do. So managed to do that. And then when I left there, I was placed on Vivitrol. So I was getting Vivitrol injections, which, going back to the Edgewood guy, addictionologist at Edgewood, the outpatient treatment center, he told me, you don't need anything like naltrexone or Vivitrol, because you have the fear of losing your job and losing everything. And I'm like thinking to myself, well, shouldn't I have had that fear a year ago already? You know? So that's how I knew that he wasn't a good addictionologist and that treatment was not going to work for me. So my brain was hijacked from that first time that I injected back in November of 2009. I had zero control. You know, and part of it is the nursing thing, where you feel so responsible. I mean, come on, who takes solo call? And when there were two of us, I'm not going to dump off on my other partner, you know, leaving everybody down. Shame and guilt paralyzed me. And like I said, I was not going to put my work off on other nurses or nurse anesthetists. It just didn't seem right. So completed that stint at Resurrection in Chicago. That would have been in January of 2011. February 2011, I started back working in St. Genevieve. I had signed a zero tolerance contract, which meant, you know, if I ever used again, I was out. You know, they gave me my one chance. So things are going along great. I didn't have any cravings or anything as long as I was on the Vivitrol. And I was working the steps, going to meetings, and it was all being documented to the Board of Nursing, but there was nothing on my record. So I continued working those steps, and then in March 2012, I was told that I could go off of the Vivitrol. I probably never should have done that, or if I did go off the Vivitrol, I should have been placed on the naltrexone. By that summer in 2012, July of 2012, I'm starting to feel the cravings coming back. And I guess I knew, but I started using little by little again. The fear I should have just at that point, woulda, coulda, should have, asked to go back on the Vivitrol. But you see, addiction wants you to feel isolated and alone, like there is no hope. And my coworkers believed me, they trusted me, they thought they knew me. They might have had fleeting thoughts of what's going on with her, but no one really confronted me or asked anything. So I couldn't share my painful story of relapse, my shameful secret. And no one was able to put together the whole picture. Then fast forward to January 2013. I did it up good this time. I don't know if it was a subconscious effort to take me out of my misery or what. I subconsciously made sure that I would get caught again. I went into the hospital, pulled out some Demerol to use for myself. But you see, this was on a weekend, and I pulled a couple of vials of Demerol. And then I used it over the weekend, went back into work Monday morning as if nothing had happened. How could I be repeating this same nightmare over again? When will I realize I've had enough pain? So with that, I was terminated from the hospital because I'd signed that zero tolerance contract with them whenever I got out of treatment. So now the hospital reported me to the Missouri Board of Nursing. My license ended up being put on probation for 5 years. I was required to work the 12-step program, comply with mandatory random drug testing, which meant I called in every single morning for actually it ended up being 7 years, to find out if I needed to submit to a urine drug screen or not. Was going to therapy. And part of the Missouri Board of Nursing's probation is that I could not touch any narcotics for 2 years. So you see, who's going to employ a nurse anesthetist if you can't touch the narcotics that you're supposed to be giving to the patients? So I sat out for 2.5 years, working the steps. I also went to a trauma treatment program down in Tennessee for like a week. And that would have been in 2012. And trying to get my life pulled back together and realize what the heck is going on and stuff. I mean, if you have the opportunity, being a nurse anesthetist is a great profession as long as you don't put your whole identity into it. I guess I couldn't take off my nursing superhero cape and ask for help. And mostly because of the stigma that's around it. My career, my license, everything was up. But in 2012, when I used for the second time, it was over. Couldn't continue with the lying, manipulating, gaslighting that I was telling myself. So it was self-sabotage in 2012. So I'm back on taking naltrexone and doing the steps and all the good stuff, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself. But then, so here it is, fast forward to 2015. There's hardly any nurse anesthesia jobs out there. There were 6 listed in the state of Missouri. I think I called every one of them, and no one had room for me, nor wanted me to be working at their place. Finally, I had connected with an oral surgeon, and so just to keep my skills up, I went and worked for free in his office for 6 months. Then, January 2016, Lake Regional Hospital in Lake Ozark, Missouri, or Osage Beach, had a job opening. Went down there, met with Dr. Mead, and he was willing to take a chance on me. But I was, told him he'd have to fill out a report on me quarterly and submit it to the Board of Nursing. Um, he gave me another chance, and he's a great guy, and I'm forever grateful for him giving me that opportunity. So I'm still doing all the same stuff, calling in every day. The Board of Nursing, because my record was stellar, let me off in 4 years probation instead of 5, which I understand these days they are not doing that anymore. I continue to work at Lake of the Ozarks. Everything's good, but the drive there is basically 3 hours from here, and my family's still back here. Got to be a little bit of a drain. I tried to get back here to the area, and then I think it was the summer of 2018, I happened to get a job at Parkland. So for those 2 years that I was off, I had a lot of time to do reflecting. So I'd obviously missed something in my initial treatment program. The fear and the shame, the guilt all paralyzed me. I was fearful of letting the world see who I really was. You see, I began stuffing my feelings at an early age. How does one go from being at the top of their anesthesia class, from being a former president of the Missouri State Association of Nurse Anesthetists, a fairly well-respected member of the community, to a drug addict? That was my question. The answer is substance use disorder and addiction know no boundaries, and they do not care who or what you are. Addiction simply wants you dead. The disease is chronic and progressive. To use just one more time starts the vicious cycle over again, and I was back in hell. I was no different than the majority. So now I'm seeking for what are the real reasons that I'm turning to the drugs. I had a lot of risk factors in play. The ease of obtaining drugs, addictive personality, and PTSD come into focus. So the part of my story that I will reveal now is that in 1973, I was involved in a terrible tractor accident. Tractor overturned. My 2 brothers were killed instantly. My dad was pinned, and I was thrown free. I was the hero running through the field trying to get help. So back in 1973, for all you social workers, can you imagine what kind of therapy I got? You got it. Got none. Mom and Dad went to church, every day for probably a year. Us kids went back to school probably within the week. Life went on. And the whole story, it was just too painful to talk about. Still sometimes is. But that's my trauma factor at an early age. Helps kind of explain how my brain works. Then, in 1986, due to complications of spina bifida, I lost a daughter. So, as with my brother's death, what did I do? Just put up the boots and go on. So 1986, and I'd been wanting to go to anesthesia school. I just started running, and like I said, I was going to be the best doggone nurse anesthetist you ever saw. So I did not know how to deal with grief at all, except to run from it. I ran from my feelings. Danielle passed away in 1986, on Father's Day, no less. and less than a year later, I threw myself into anesthesia school at WashU. My point here is I've identified PTSD is also a trigger for addiction. And what was her statistic up there? 80% of people who experience addiction before age 20 who experience trauma end up with an addiction. So I fell into those statistics. There's a lot of different reasons. I'm programmed to be the overachiever. And I remember one of the treatment centers, she said, "You are nothing but a self-centered, people-pleasing person with low self-esteem." How do you know that? And it's because she said, "You're all like that. That's everybody's problem." You're self-centered. You build up this life where you're going to be the best, perfect, and hey, look at me. I got all of this stuff under control. I got the best family. I got the best whatever. People-pleasing, you'll give the shirt off your back and you'll freeze to death. You'll say yes to anything. You got to learn to say no. And low self-esteem, I'm like, I didn't think I had low self-esteem. You say I do, I guess I do. So that was one of the things from therapy that I learned. So the vicious cycle began again, and like I said, I ended up working down in Lake Regional, and all was good there. Then fast forward to 2020. What happened in 2020? COVID. Okay? So I did not handle COVID well. I hate being isolated. I am a people person. In 2020, July of 2020, the cravings returned. And I'd stopped going to AA meetings. My unrestricted access to narcotics, along with the many risk factors, took over again. Isolation was the big one, though, that put me over the edge. Just add to that some family issues. The perfect storm was brewing yet again. So by summer, I was using. And then on September 1st, 2020, I was driving home from work, and I used for the last time. You see, I pulled over on a little county road, probably about 5 miles from my house, thinking I would just take a little nap. Well, the next thing I know, I think it was a friendly gentleman from St. John's Sheriff's Department knocking on my window. And basically, he told me, "You got two choices here." He asked if I'd been using, and I said yes. Is that rather obvious? He said, "You can take a ride in the ambulance to an emergency room, or you can go to jail." Well, I wouldn't do well in jail, so I did the obvious and took a ride back to Parkland, where I had gotten the drugs from, and that was it. That was it. I knew immediately that I was retired. I could not subject myself, my family, my friends, my coworkers anymore to this disease of substance use disorder. The access to narcotics was my downfall. I realized I couldn't keep putting those drugs into my body, and I couldn't keep doing it to friends, family, coworkers, anyone. So I waited a few months, and I made my nursing license inactive. I do have a few statistics regarding COVID. It seems that this is from my friend Rigo. So on September 1st, 2020, shortly thereafter, I went to another treatment center, and this one was run by a CRNA up in Chesterton, Indiana. Rigo Garcia is the name of it. And since then, since they opened the center in 2015, 600 CRNAs have gone through this professionals program, and 3,000 people in total. Yeah, they have pretty good results. So some of the latest figures from Rigo is, the statistic is that it used to be 15 or 20 years before addiction would appear in CRNAs. And now, what's going on now in the last 5 years, people who are anesthetists, it's showing up within the first 15 years of their career. So I am super grateful. I had over 20 years. Actually, by the time I made my license inactive, I had 33 years of anesthesia. I'm good with it. I was nearly 60 years old. There's a lot of people that don't have 30 plus years in a career. I'm fine with it. Another statistic that Rigo told me was pre-COVID, opioids were, and it would take people 6 months to a year to get caught. That was the primary drug of choice for anesthetists. And then alcohol was second. Well, since COVID, would you care to guess what's going on? It switched to alcohol being the drug of choice for CRNAs. And it takes an average of a year and a half before people, and then opioids are second. So I just found that things are changing. We're learning more and more about the brain. Most recently, I've been going to a therapist down in Perryville, and she's a big believer that, trauma in those childhood years. So I've done a lot of EMDR with her, and life is good. I can accept where I'm at right now. So currently, I'm enjoying time with my family. I've got 5 grandchildren and 5 children, 2 of which are married, and spend a lot of time with the grandkids. And my other passion, I guess you would say, is I volunteer at St. Vincent de Paul here in St. Genevieve. So that's how I spend my time. So I have a lot of good time. Any questions?
Tell me, Brian, I don't know, but I am so looking for an EMDR therapist, and I feel like I cannot find any anywhere. It's like, I feel like that is the key for our clients.
Do you want the name?
Well, if you're willing to share.
I am, because, I was kind of looking for the same, and was surprised to find right there in Perryville, Mary Eswine. Yeah, she's fantastic.
I knew she did, but I thought she was totally retired.
No, she's opened up her own business. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah. And that was a problem. Living in St. Genevieve, I didn't want to go to AA meetings in St. Genevieve. So for those 2 years, I was driving up. My home group is in St. Louis off of Olive. So, a lot of driving. A lot of time to reflect. And very grateful that I didn't end up on the statistic of being a deceased CRNA. Any other questions? Like I said, I share my story with anesthesia schools. I go out to Kansas City. I speak at Barnes, Goldfarb, hoping that my story will prevent them from ever injecting in the first place. Like I said, I had a choice that one night in November 2009, but after that, my brain was hijacked. There was no controlling it. I had brief periods where I did. I can tell you, I actually even was a peer assistance advisor for Missouri Association of Nurse Anesthetists. and American Association of Nurse Anesthetists until so I became that probably in 2014, so until 2020. I did that. So I had a lot of different anesthetists calling me up with their various stories, be it drugs or alcohol. Most recently, I know of a CRNA. He'd been clean for 17 years. A couple of years ago, he relapsed. The DEA was brought in on his case, and it was big, bad, and ugly. By the time he had to appear in court in Kansas City, within the hour, they had put a little blip out there, nurse anesthetists stealing drugs from patients, his sentencing will be in April. His sentencing came. He actually ended up spending 8 days in prison on weekends. And it's like, what did that do to help out an addict? It did nothing. But this system is so broken. And that could have been me. It could have been any of us nurse anesthetists that abused. But for whatever reason, the DEA got involved in his case. And he was honest with them. He was honest with them without a lawyer. So that was the nail in his coffin. Yes?
Are there quality control measures now in a hospital for the discard of the drug?
There are. Depends which hospital you work at. Oh, also, I don't know if any of you know the white milk substance propofol. That has become one of the most highly addicting substances that is used nowadays. You take a little nap with it. Problem is, if you mess with that, it's easy to overdose. But people like to do it because it's hard to get caught. Because it gets out of your system so fast. So it's been pushed for a long time that propofol would become a controlled substance. It has not happened. I do know that in St. Genevieve, at that hospital, very tight controls on the propofol. But at the majority of hospitals here in Missouri, there are not. And I think one of the biggest things would be random drug screening for nurses and nurse anesthetists. And that doesn't even happen up at big barns. They say they have the right to random drug screen you, but in talking to all of my friends up there, it never happens. Never happens. And the other good thing would be if you actually turned your drugs back into the pharmacy where they can run the titers and see that it's actually the real stuff or if it's just normal saline. So I do know St. Genevieve has very good tight controls. Right, Laura? Any other questions? Yes?
Are you still on the Vivitrol?
No. As long as the drug's not right in front of me, and I'm not going to go out there seeking it, getting it anyplace, because I'm just not. It doesn't even cross my mind. Well, actually, when I first retired, I kind of took over my dad's farm for about 2 years and stuff. So I was outside all the time. I was loving it because I was outside all the time. So no, I am not on any medications currently. So. Yes.
I just wanted to thank you for sharing with us.
You are very welcome. I hope it saves a life someday. Thank you.